everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Bullish Show. Today with me, Girish Redekar from India, and also as an incredibly successful entrepreneur. Girish is an entrepreneur and an IT pro that has been keen on helping software as a service businesses demonstrate security shops to close deals faster. And what I mean by that is he's going to talk about how to make your site secure and compliant. We'll get more into that later. But a little bit more about Girish. He founded RecruiterBox, which is a software as a service platform that helps companies stay on top of their recruitment process. He successfully scaled up to 8 figures before exiting an all-cash deal. And at the time, RecruiterBox had over 2,500 customers. He then went on and founded his current company, Sprinto, which is an automated enterprise-grade cybersecurity solution. Now, I know some people's eyes are already glazing over about cybersecurity, but we're going to talk about why it's important for your business. Basically, he helps software service companies be ready to comply with all the rules that surround us as websites in a global community of the internet. So welcome to the show, Girish.
Thanks, Jeff. That was a very generous introduction. Thanks for having me.
So, Girish, let's get straight to the point before we actually start talking about how you became an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And Girish is based in Bangalore at the moment, which is in India. And I've been to India 4 or 5 times. And for any of you that have not been to India, what blew me away about India was the people. They are so eager to learn, they are passionate, and they're in your face. They want to learn. They are keen to succeed. And I was just incredibly impressed by the attitude of, especially the young people that I met at Bombay Institute of Technology, where it was the first place I ever spoke at in India. Bombay Institute of Technology, by the way, is actually based in one of the biggest cities in the world called Mumbai, which used to be known as Bombay. So Girish, before we talk about how you started the journey, we'll just quickly talk about Sprinto and how and Sprinto helps people, websites and entrepreneurs provide security for their website as well as compliance. So can you tell me in 60 seconds what that means? Because we've all heard of things like, well, maybe we haven't. Europe's got this GDPR compliance you're supposed to meet. So, Girish, I'm putting you right on the spot now. Why should entrepreneurs care about being compliant and having great security for their website?
Right. That's a great question, Jeff. So, I'll try and keep it simple. If you are an entrepreneur who runs a business around, business software, which fundamentally means that you're selling software to other businesses. This is where security and compliance starts becoming the most important ones, though it is important if you're even writing consumer software, but I'll take that specific angle right now. And fundamentally, most business software today is written in a format called software as a service, which means that I'm not just giving you the software that you're going to use like a CD and install it on your machine, etc. Yep. You're just using it like you use Gmail or Facebook or anything else. So you just open up a browser and you're accessing the software. Yep. Now, what really happens when a business uses software in this form is, imagine I'm a business and you're a software vendor, is that my data is on your servers. And it's natural that I have some concerns and I want some assurances about whether you're keeping this data safe and secure, because who gets access to it? How do your employees access this? Can it sort of get leaked? Can it have problems? And so on and so forth. So it's natural for this to happen. And as more and more software gets into this format where my data is on your servers, it's natural that these questions they start increasing. Mm-hmm. The point of all of these compliance and security programs, and it'll sound like an alphabet soup: GDPR, HIPAA, SOC 2, and whatnot. So like if you leave around the jargon, these are just ways or certifications for you to explain to me that, hey, I follow these standard industry best practices, and I maintain a security program, which means that your data is safe and secure, and it's not going to fall into the wrong hands or in the hands of unauthorized people. So that's quite simply it. So it's almost like the trust currency by which you do software business today, and that's the important bit of becoming compliant with these things. So if you are building a software that you are going to sell to, let's say like a large business tomorrow, let's say you're selling a software to Coca-Cola, they're going to ask you, hey, how are you going to make sure that this software is safe and secure, and what are you going to do to keep my data safe and secure? And that's what Sprinto helps you do. We help you implement this. This would otherwise take months and months of your time. We help you get there in days, and that's quite simply it. Does that make sense?
Cool. So you're actually helping software as a service platforms comply and be safe.
Yes.
Okay. So is it useful for companies that actually have an e-commerce site that might be from BigCommerce or Shopify, or you've got a WordPress site? Is your service useful for that, or is it just for software as a service companies?
Software as a service company is where we have a sweet spot. But if you're an e-commerce company and you're operating in some regulated geographies like Europe, where you are supposed to follow GDPR, then yes, it's relevant for you as well. So increasingly every country or region is coming up with its own privacy laws. In the US, in California, we have the CCPA. In Canada, we have PIPEDA. Europe, of course, we have GDPR. And increasingly, I expect that in the next couple of years, you're going to have different privacy laws in every region. So even if you are running like a e-commerce store or a Shopify store of any sort where you are serving these regions, then it becomes important for you to follow the law of the land, which is these things. So yes, Sprinto does become relevant to you there as well, and we can help you get through these compliances and follow the law when you're operating geographies such as these.
Okay, so you make it easy by automating this compliance, essentially.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, we've got the technicalities out of the way for the moment. It's good. Now we wanted to find out, Girish, how did you get into being an entrepreneur? And was there an aha moment where you, at the Madras Institute of Technology, and you went, I don't want to work for a corporation, I want to be in control of my life and run my own gig and be an entrepreneur? How did you start being an entrepreneur?
Honestly, it was a very accidental thing. I think I'd probably be one of the most accidental entrepreneurs out there. I'd never set out saying that, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur or run my own business or anything of that sort. So in fact, back in college, I always just wanted to go on, pursue a PhD, do some real science, as we used to call it back then. And that was a sort of thing that, and I had like my blinders on, and that was narrow path that I was looking at. Incidentally, I decided that I would rather want to do like a job first rather than higher studies. Like I wanted to do something in the real world a little bit. And even there, like it was a very simple thing. Like I was literally, my job involved playing around with spreadsheets and PowerPoints. So I was an analyst working with a consulting firm, and we used to just number crunch a large number of complex formulae in spreadsheets and stuff like that. So that is what my life was about. Entrepreneurship happened rather accidentally. So it so turned out that I was friends with my co-founder, who was my co-founder for both RecruiterBox and Sprinto. And, we used to just discuss these ideas about, hey, it'd be nice if we could do something like this. It'd be nice if we could do something like that, and so on and so forth. So we were just bouncing off ideas about, some cool things that we could build. And honestly, at the time, I don't think we were necessarily thinking about it as building a business as much as we were thinking about it as building like a tool or something of that sort.
In other words, just creating something.
Yeah. We never, I don't think we were that serious about building a business, or, I don't think we even knew the word startup back then. So it was just, two blokes just sitting out there thinking about ideas of stuff we could build. And I think it came to a point where we were deciding about, whether we should be doing an MBA or, trying to do this thing for good. And we told ourselves that, okay, let's just give this a shot for a year and see how it goes. And that's how it began. We just started working on this one particular idea, and the idea was shit.
Were you working at the time at a full-time job?
Yeah, I had a full-time job, and then we quit the job to do this, so which was hard. And this was at the height of the recession. This was 2008. This is where 2007 we had the big recession. 2008 was a bad time to leave job because it was hard enough to keep a job. But yeah, I mean, we are in our 20s. The confidence is high, so we very, I would say, rather naively sort of took the dive without really understanding the full repercussions of this thing, and we just started working on something.
Yep.
Now, one of the things we sort of were a little cognizant of, but it sort of became real very quickly, is that we had to teach ourselves programming, because we didn't really program professionally ever before. You learn a little bit of programming in an engineering college, but that was the extent of it.
Yep.
So I think the first 2 or 3 years were real pain, because we were teaching ourselves programming. We built a bunch of tools, none of which worked. And it used to be this thing where we used to get an idea, we used to get all excited about it, build it out, and just to realize that, hey, nobody wants this. And that multiplied over like 2 years is a lot of time.
Yeah.
I think the good thing that happened in the process, though, is that we actually taught ourselves how to build things well. So I think in 2011 is when we started working on RecruiterBox. This is where this was something that got traction. We realized that people wanted to use this, and for quite simply, RecruiterBox is what we call an applicant tracking system. It's a way for businesses to track all the people who apply to your company for jobs, and to track the fact that they're going through this interview process, this person gave this feedback about them, help you screen candidates, and follow the entire process from the point that a candidate applies to you to the point that you might make a job offer to them. So this entire sequence is basically tracked in that software. So we built that, and that had some real traction, and we sort of doubled down on it. So, but there was a good amount of 2 to 3 years where we were just wandering in the desert, wondering what to do, those were, I mean, in hindsight, we learned a lot, but those were not fun times.
Yeah. So, where did the idea for RecruiterBox come from? I'm always fascinated by where does the idea arise from? Was it a problem that you observed? Was it something someone shared with you? Was it something you experienced yourself? For example, one of the reasons Uber started was because the two founders were on the side of the road in Paris trying to hail a taxi on a wet, cold French night, and they couldn't hail a taxi. There was taxis going everywhere, but they couldn't stop one. So they saw a problem and then came up with a solution. So where did the idea for RecruiterBox come from?
That's a great question. So it did come a little bit from personal experience. So here's what happened in my the first couple of jobs that I did right out of college. Before I started working on RecruiterBox, one of the first job we had to go back to our campuses and hire for the next year, and I somehow got sort of roped into that thing. And I remember we did this thing where we had this like large meeting room with a huge table in between, and we had gone to all these colleges to hire folks from, and we had like this huge pile of resumes right out there, and we were literally going through it, and we were trying to enter stuff into a Excel sheet saying that, okay, this person, this is good, this isn't good, and then there were about 5 of us trying to do this entire thing.
This is all manual.
Yeah, this is all manual, and that's the only way we could think of doing it then. And incidentally, I and my co-founder were both involved in that process. So we had some first-hand experience, and it's not like the aha moment happened there that, hey, we should do something about it, but it's something that we could connect dots to when we were thinking of problems to solve. The second job I had, incidentally, I joined a team which was relatively small. I think I was the 4th person to join the team I was in, which grew to about 80 people in the span of about 15 months or so. So I again, incidentally, got roped into the hiring bit over there. And here's the interesting bit. This was a large company. And this was a Fortune 500 company that I was working with. And they actually had a software that was supposed to help you with this thing. The thing is, nobody really wanted to use the software. It was so bloody painful to use it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was very interesting to see that people always found a way to not use it. So we eventually started doing this thing where we had this shared drive where people would dump resumes there and put feedback there, but they would do everything but to touch that software with a 10-foot pole. So it was that painful to use. So again, both of these experiences were something that we could draw on, but it's not like, the idea happened that, hey, this is a problem worth solving at that point of time. So like I was saying, during the journey where we were looking at a bunch of other problems to solve, this was one of the things that struck to us that seems like an interesting problem, because there aren't too many tools that both are easy to use, but at the same time get the job done. You either left with something like a spreadsheet, which is easy to use, but it doesn't really do a great job of actually managing all the hiring in one place.
Yeah, I hate spreadsheets.
Yeah, and
they make my eyes bleed.
I don't blame you. Yeah,
and look, I can use them to sum up, a column,
yeah.
right? But
They're not fun.
They are horrible. Spreadsheets are horrible, but for the right people, they're fantastic. So I digress. Sorry.
No, but you're exactly right. So you kind of like between a rock and a hard place, because you either have these spreadsheets or you have like these extremely complex tools that nobody wants to use.
That's right.
And the idea of RecruiterBox was that, hey, can we actually sort of do something that doesn't amount to putting pointed objects in your eyes, do something that's simple to use.
Pins in your eyes, that's right. And want you to run away with a circus and do really bad things. Okay, yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's kind of how it germinated.
Okay. So how long did RecruiterBox, so when did you start it and when did you exit?
So we started it in 2011. We exited it towards the end of 2017, early 2018. So we ran it about for a good 6-7 years before we exited it.
So what happened there was that did a venture capital company turn up? Did a competitor show up? How did you exit?
So we were doing pretty well. It was a completely bootstrapped business, which among other things meant that all of us founders, got our hands dirty with pretty much all aspects of running a software as a service business. So it was, to begin with, it was writing code, then it was about running engineering, to running product, to running marketing and running sales, and so on and so forth. So it was a fun journey in that sense that we learned everything inside out, as you would, as you're a bootstrap company as well. So which means you don't exactly have capital to start hiring executives from the word go. So the way it works is you build out a function and then you sort of hire people who can run the function for you. That is, I think it was a great learning experience for us. And we were growing pretty fast. At the time that we sold the company, I think you mentioned that we were already 2,500 customers strong all across the world. I think about 70% of our customers were in the US. And we were growing by about 100 new customers a month, which is quite phenomenal at that volume. So that was, we were at a great place at the time. The reason to sell it is not so much about, it was actually a great, comfortable business to run, and we could just sit back there and relax and grow rich with that business. It's just that as founders decided that we wanted to work on something else over and above. RecruiterBox had pretty much become like a ship on autopilot, and we felt that our time was better spent elsewhere. So incidentally, at that time, this offer came in. They would love to purchase RecruiterBox and make it part of a larger HR suite of software. And yeah, that's it's not like we set out looking for a buyer. It just so happened at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you got bored.
I wouldn't say that running a business is boring, but yeah, I think we could say that we thought that we had another startup inside of us which could potentially be much larger. All three of us thought of that. All three of us co-founders.
Okay, cool. So Sprinto,
Mm-hmm.
compliance and security.
Mm-hmm.
Look, that really makes my eyes, pins in the eyes about that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're going, okay, let's make websites and software as a service companies compliant with every rule in the world. including GDPR, Canada, America, Australia, um, yeah, Lithuania, I don't know. But the
Mhm.
reality was that you are going to take on regulation, compliance, and security from every country in the world.
Mhm.
Um, where did this idea come from?
Yeah, like having said that, we wanted to do something more exciting. This is probably the most
Exciting. Okay.
boring, unsexy business to pick, but I honestly feel it's really, really exciting. I'll explain why.
Okay.
uh,
Cool.
so one of the things that happened while we were running RecruiterBox is that we had to become compliant, because we were a
Right.
global business.
Okay.
We had to become compliant with this framework like SOC 2, GDPR, etc. If you remember, 2017 was when GDPR was sort of
Yep.
becoming the law. And so we sort of went through that wave, and as engineers, these things fell onto our laps. These things usually will fall into the laps of whoever's managing engineering in the company. And I don't think it was a very pleasant experience. We sort of
Yeah.
went through this process where we hired a consultant. The person spent about 6 months in the company. We sort of just cannibalized a bunch of other projects that we had in a pipeline to make space for this. We bend over backward to try and get this done. At the end of the whole thing, it was a painful thing. Like we didn't even get it done properly. So it was one of those things where we realized that, hey, this ought to be a lot more better. And it's important that the reason you're doing these things is not necessarily because you want to, but because you're made to. So
Yep.
the way these compliances work is that it's a reality of the business. You have to abide by these laws like GDPR, or your customers asking you for these compliances like SOC 2. So though they sound like they are related to information security, which I don't blame you for thinking it's boring. The real reason you're actually doing it is for revenue, right? Because if you don't do these things, you don't exist as a business, and you can't actually close the deals that you want to close. So the
And
real
and
reason to
and,
do this is a
and the government governments can come after you, and lawyers can come after you. Yeah.
yeah, in some cases it's the governments who are going to come after you. In some cases your customers are just going to say that, "Hey, I can't do business with you unless you have these things,"
Yeah.
because
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
it's
Yep.
business software. So in both cases it just simply means that this is this is actually a revenue driver more than a security program.
Okay. Yep.
And that's where it starts becoming interesting, because that was my outlook to it when we were running RecruiterBox. And we realized that's where it becomes interesting, because people really, really want this. And the current way of doing this is extremely painful. It takes months. It takes resources away from the most probably the expensive team in your company, which is probably engineering. And it at the end of the whole thing, you still don't have the certainty that it'll get done. And what if we could automate this thing, get you there in days instead of months, make the effort? So we actually reduce the effort by more than 1/10, and help you get these things done without making it sound like you're going through a root canal. So that's the that's the thing about Sprinto. So that's what gets me out of the bed every morning. I actually have been through that pain before, and I think it's, while we do the boring unsexy work, the outcomes of that are really, really monumental for the customers that we work with.
Yeah. So you went from stacks of resumes on a table, um, spreadsheets, Google Docs, mate, they're not Google Docs, but spreadsheets, which was RecruiterBox, because that was a big problem. You went to going, okay, we built RecruiterBox, and we've got a problem at RecruiterBox because we had to hire a consultant for 6 months, and we need to comply with all these acronyms and government regulations around the world. So again, you solved another problem,
Mhm.
um, which is fantastic. And that's what a lot of this is what I love about being an entrepreneur, right? You're trying to solve problems all the time. Then you
Mhm.
can work out how can I scale this and make it easy and cost effective.
Yeah.
So we can help others make money while we make money. Okay, that's good. So you're adding value to the world. Um, what have been some of the challenges for you along the way? So obviously you're paying a lot of engineers a lot of time, a lot of money to fix these things, or to find solutions and write code. Um, on top of that, not only creating the actual solution using software, but you're also trying to scale it with marketing. So let's go to the next part of this. You obviously paying some very smart software developers a lot of money to actually write the code for you. That's scary because but you've written the code. You've written code before, so you sort of know enough to actually allow you to keep an eye on them and make sure they're actually behaving themselves and not ripping you off. Is that right?
Well, yeah, it's better than that. I think the developers we have are like better engineers than I am. So I'm proud of the team we've built there.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm sure you've hired engineers rather than you becoming a wannabe engineer that had to do it because you had to because you're doing RecruiterBox. Next one is, how did you grow the brand? Was it referral? Was it just listening to your customers? What does marketing look like for Sprinto?
That's a great question. So, part of what we do in marketing is, I would say, simpler, if not easier, because this is such a common problem. If you are actually an entrepreneur who's doing business software, right? If you're an entrepreneur who sells business software, this is something that you naturally come across. So what happens as a result is a lot of our marketing is about being present where people look for information around this, rather than trying to shove something down people's throats. It's a lot simpler because this is a real problem. People look for solutions for this problem. So our job becomes a little easier. So as long as you are talking about the right things about how do you solve this problem, if you come across this is the way to deal with it, these are the steps you follow, and so on and so forth. That's kind of like what a lot of our marketing looks like. It actually looks like a lot of education. And so we do all the standard things that any software marketing business would do, which is make sure that you're present on Google, you get found when people are searching for these things. There are there are stores, SaaS, software as a service stores, where you are present, and so on and so forth. But that's a little later in the life cycle, though, right? Like the typical problem that any entrepreneur would probably face is, how do you get your first 10, your first 100 customers? Those are the toughest, and before any engine starts kicking in. I think we were a little lucky there as well, having been prior founders, and having the time between we exited RecruiterBox and we sort of started working on Sprinto. We had about a year and a half of a break, and we spend that time speaking to a bunch of other fellow founders, trying to figure out, just trying to talk to them, learn from their experiences, share notes, etc. So one of the things that happened in the process is we were in touch with a bunch of other fellow founders, and we found quick ways of validating that, hey, this thing that we are thinking about, it's Sprinto, is actually has legs, and people have this as a real problem. Yep. So when it came to actually trying to acquire your first few customers, it was a relatively simpler. It was that people had this problem. We reached out to them saying that, hey, would you like us to help with this? And they were like, yes, please. I have no idea what I'm doing right now. Please help me out with this. And that was like a great way to get started. So the first beta customers were relatively simple that way. People were more than willing to get help from us and help us test out the software, whether it does what it's supposed to do, and so on and so forth. So that happened. Which, by the way, before that, before we actually even put the software out to people, we went through this whole process ourselves as a software company. So we actually went through, like, I think, a dozen audits. We just used to go to these GDPR and SOC 2 and all of these folks and tell them that, hey, help us become compliant, and we would just make sure whatever they're asking us to do, we can translate that into software. So that was one of the things that we did. And so the first, I think the 10 customers are always the hardest, but we went about it slowly and steadily, after which our marketing engine sort of kicked in, and we could just tell people from referrals. The existing customers who were happy with us, they kept referring other fellow customers to us. So the journey from there on was relatively, I wouldn't say smoother, but easier for sure.
Right. So how did you have conversations with the customers? Was it email? Was it Slack? Was it Facebook group? What did you use?
Zoom. We were born in the pandemic, so there was no other option. Like we were doing all of this on Zoom.
Okay, that's cool. In other words, you are actually listening to your customers, and they're telling you what they want, and you built that incrementally.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think we did was with our customers' permission, we used to record every conversation that we had. That's one of the advantages of doing this on Zoom, and that really helped us pour back over the conversation. What usually happens is, if you're having a face-to-face conversation, you write some notes, and then you it's always hard to have a conversation, take notes, and make sure you covered everything that happens over there. One of the I would say I didn't think of this, but one of the advantages of doing this over Zoom was that we could actually record the conversation and look back at
you
it.
can
And
record the conversation on Zoom. Yeah, exactly.
yes, and you could go back at it and get that every detail and nuance that was there. And this is extremely useful at the early part of any business. People will tell you things that are actually problematic for them in one way or the other, and it sort of helps you zone into those the specific pain points that they have. And that was, I think, a blessing in disguise.
Cool. And by recording, you can also share it with the rest of the team, can't you?
Yeah, so we can actually take snippets, and we internally you should have like hey, this point, at this particular point in the video at 11th minute and 10 seconds, this person tells you something interesting. And it's very you can viscerally understand the pain over there, or the actual problem that is there, and go and solve that thing. So it becomes great for internal education as well.
Yeah. So what's been the biggest challenge for you as an entrepreneur? You said you were working for 2 or 3 years after you started, RecruiterBox. You left your job, so it wasn't really a side hustle. It was more like you had to live simply and cheaply, wouldn't you, like to do this?
Yeah, those were not fun times. I think we were living on ramen at the time, just noodles. uh, uh,
Were you living at home with mum and dad? What was going on?
No. We weren't like so. I had saved some money from my job, which I ran through in the first year, and then for me, for example, my brother supported me. So right. Thankful for him for that. But yeah, those were some tough times financially.
Yeah. And that's a challenge, isn't it? Sometimes just lasting long enough to actually win and succeed, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's harder, especially because it's not necessarily that my parents, for example, were extremely supportive of me being an entrepreneur. They'd rather that I
normally not actually.
Yeah, they were. To be fair to them, they were being as supportive as they could. It's just that they couldn't understand what is it that I was doing.
They would have had no idea what you're doing. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I tried to explain to my parents what I was doing, and I said I'm blogging, right? And
I know that can be hard to explain.
And I'm going, but they were proud of me. Like I was 50 plus and I was blogging, right? So, like it's really it was, but they went, well, it looks like you're doing okay and it's good and very proud of you and. Not quite sure what blogging means and have no idea what podcasting is because they're in their 80s, right? So, yeah, so you did it. So what are some of the biggest challenges you've had apart from just the financial side? What are some other challenges you've had? And what were some of the mentors, whether it's were books mentors, were people mentors? What inspired you to keep going?
So I'm actually not much of a reader, fortunately or unfortunately. So I haven't really read that many books, I guess I'm bad at learning from other people or from books that way. So this was kind of a little bit of something that we had to figure out on our own, not because help wasn't available, but it's just, I guess some people are just built that way. I think one of the things that I remember...
We're all built differently. That's what's fascinating about being human.
Okay. Exactly. And I think one of the things I learned while doing RecruiterBox is that it's one thing to have something that's working in the sense that you have a piece of software that you're selling, customers seem to want it, etc. But it's quite another thing to actually build out a team that makes this a real business. Yes. It's great when you're 2 or 3 people. Everybody does everything and everybody's pitching in, and this is sort of the the only thing that you have really going on in your life. So so it's easy for you to just wake up and just run after this thing. But when you're hiring a team, and like there are people who are going to do specific parts of the job, and then they are going to go back to their families and their and whatever it is that they want to do with their life, and they're going to give you like 8 hours of the day, and how to actually make sure the engine still works, and how to get the best out of them, how to make sure they work with other people, how to structure teams in the sense that makes sense for them, how to get them motivated to solve, to care about a problem that you are solving. All of these things are things that we had to learn along the way. I think that is an important lesson to learn, to actually how to build a company, over and above how to just run like a profitable, small, nice business. So at its height, RecruiterBox was about 50 people strong, with people across 2 continents. So we had people working in the US and in India, some of who were working remotely. So we had to figure all of those things out. And I think there's a fair bit of, though I can't pinpoint the exact lessons out there, it sort of became muscle memory, which is very useful when you're running Sprinto. So these are things that you now innately know about how to build teams, how to go about hiring, how to put together teams, how to make sure that they are motivated, they're hitting their goals, and the whole thing becomes more than the sum of its parts. That's a hard thing to do. And I think that was one of the most challenging things for me to learn.
Yep. So, you said you don't really know what you were doing, but you learned it from muscle memory. But you're building a team and building a culture. So, how do you motivate your team? Is it because you're going? I think what I've learned is that the team needs to lean into your vision and understand that you are changing the world by the software you're using for this problem you're solving.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you get the team to buy in?
That's a good one. I don't think I have a silver bullet answer to it. I think the important thing that I learned over there is to put it simply, is to over communicate. What tends to happen.
Yep.
Yeah, communicate more than you would normally would, because what tends to happen is, you sort of it's easy to fall into the trap that, hey, this is obvious, right? Yeah, that everybody's going to understand why we are doing this, and I mentioned this one time 3 months ago, and it ought to stick, and that the world doesn't work that way. So I think the thing that if I have to put it a little simply, is to keep them motivated, is to keep repeating yourself, and to just sort of communicate more than you would naturally would. So I'm an introvert. I tend to talk less as much as possible, and I do a lot better in one-on-one conversations than I do in like one-to-many kind of conversations. But I had to train myself to do that, and sort of keep talking again and again about what exactly the vision is. Every time we could be solving like a small minute problem, to still tie it back to why we are doing this, and sort of somehow tie it back to the larger picture that we are going to go after, and just training myself to do this again and again, even if I'm boring myself to death, but to realize that it's important for the team, that you can actually do this again and again. So I think that was one of the things that we had to do, and all three of us sort of co-founders had to learn to do that. By the end of which whole thing, which I was very glad, is that we actually had a company that was like, when I said it was running very well, I'm actually proud of the fact that we more than building a successful business, we actually ran a well-running company, because when we actually sold the company and the founders moved out, the company continued to run smoothly. So I think in some way we made ourselves redundant in the company, which is like while it makes you feel useless, it's one of the great outcomes to have. Like, the company is not overly dependent on you at some point of time, and it runs on autopilot.
Yep. So, I remember watching an interview with George Lucas, and he talked about that not only to fall in love with what you do, you need to fall in love with the love of the process of what you do.
Mm-hmm.
So what you've just described to me is that when you walked away, the company kept running because you actually, sounds like to me, you've created a company that's driven by process as well.
Yes.
And as entrepreneurs, we typically get excited by the idea, but not excited by the boring part of the process, right?
Yes.
And systems. But the thing about systems and process is they will set you free as an entrepreneur because you allow those and the people that run those to free you from the day-to-day of telling everyone what to do, because the processes are written, they're recorded, and the company starts running itself. It's like it's like a system. What is a system? And is that correct?
Yeah, Jeff, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like you said that a lot more, a lot better than I was trying to say it. You're exactly right. Like the fact that you have built a system and a process that runs itself is extremely liberating. It allows
Oh,
you as entrepreneurs to sort of work on the next frontier rather than just sort of making sure that the existing thing that's already working is working well.
yeah,
So that's extremely liberating, and that's the only way I can think of building companies now. So it's
yep,
you hit the nail on the head.
yep. Yeah, I suppose I discovered it when I launched this podcast 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I didn't launch the podcast before that, I'd hid all the microphones and all the equipment in a cupboard because I didn't have the team and the processes to do it. 2 years ago, I had the team in place and I went, I think I can do this now. So
Mm-hmm.
what I love about what we're talking about, process and systems, is that I record this and then I give it to the team, and then magically in 4 to 5 weeks' time, it's produced. And not because of me, it's because my fabulous team and the systems we have in place and the software we use
Mm-hmm.
allows us to do this.
Yeah.
It is incredibly empowering, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I know exactly what you mean, and when it sort of falls together, it's beautiful. It's
Yeah.
like choreography done
Yeah.
best.
And when you start though, you've got to do you got to do it all,
Yeah.
and that's challenging.
Yeah.
So
I, I know what you mean here. This is. I'm glad you brought this up.
yeah, because I am now in love with the process of what I do, as well as loving what I do. And I think as wannabe entrepreneurs, people are starting a side hustle, they're going to realize that from day one, they've actually got to build the process that helps them get things done. In other words, takes their creation and builds a process that shares it with the world. And then even the process of communication, which you talked about as well.
Yeah.
In other words, as entrepreneurs, sometimes we want to hide. Especially like some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts, right? And you talked about over communicating, which I think is fabulous. You need to be telling and telling and telling all the time. This is why we're doing this, to make a difference and to make your own little dent in the universe with your product in a niche in your world for the world.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to learn as entrepreneurs, is that you can create the product, but how can I create the process that amplifies it and scales this to actually make a bigger difference? Because as entrepreneurs, you want to make a bigger difference. You talked early to me. You said, okay, RecruiterBox was great, but we wanted to create something that was bigger than that. And that's it's a bigger vision. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is actually so cool. And this is, as entrepreneurs, we need to actually learn how to scale better to make a bigger difference. And it's not just about the bottom line about making money. It's about how to make a positive impact on the planet.
Yeah. And I think you said this very well, but like while entrepreneurship involves this burst of creativity toward the beginning somewhere, I think a lot of value actually comes from there is when you take that creative, whatever it is that you created there, and sort of make it repeatable, which is where the process comes in, right? So you figured out something new, and now can you sort of repeat that? Because if you figured out that new thing at that just point in time by itself, it's not useful, right? Like what you need to do is basically be able to repeat that again and again, and that's where process and systems really come in, right? So that burst of creativity that you have this lightning in a bottle. Now can you sort of keep doing this again and again and again and again as an habit? And that when that happens, it's great.
It is. And that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
Yep. So before we finish, Girish, any top tips to entrepreneurs that have an idea and want to share it with the world? What would you recommend they do? 2 or 3 ideas, 1 idea, it really doesn't matter.
I think all of these ideas tend to be extremely contextual to the nature of the business that you're doing. But if there was one thing I would point out to entrepreneurs who have an idea, is to sort of almost move away from the idea zone and get into the problem zone. So like basically an idea is a solution to a problem. And I would, one of the things that I've taught myself to do is, rather than being married to the idea, it's more important to get married to a problem, because what happens is an idea is a tool to solve the problem. And when you have this idea, it's almost, you think of it like a block that you're trying to see, and it fits into a problem that exists out in the real world. So the thing that I would recommend many people who are starting out new and who speak to me is that, okay, you have this idea, go out there, talk to as many people as possible, and see if sort of there's a place where it actually fits, like into a problem that exists out there in the real world. And that's, I think, the discipline that's required to convert an idea to a business, to real business. Like you just need to keep talking to enough people, putting that idea out there in enough places to see where it fits. Sometimes it's a variation of that idea that will fit. It's something in the neighborhood of the idea, or a slight change in it, or it may not fit the place where you originally thought it would. It fits like a completely different market segment, completely different set of people, or something else. But you need to take it out for a spin. You can't keep it in your head. That's how actually. So the way to refine an idea is not to think more about it, but to put it out there in the real world, as fragile as it might be, and see whether it is resilient, whether it actually fits something that exists out in the real world. A gap in the real world is you're trying to fit the idea into. So my mental image of an idea is like a block, and the world is full of gaps, and you're trying to see if this idea fits one of those gaps that exists out there.
Okay, so what you're saying is you need to be married to solving the problem and the iterations of that until you actually keep filling all the gaps until you actually solve it properly.
Yes, because what the world cares about is their problems. They don't care about your idea at the end of the day.
They don't give a shit about your company. They don't give a shit about your product. What they give a shit about is actually, does your product or service help me?
Yeah.
And that's what you keep diving into, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Girish, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, mate. Hope to bump into you in Madras or India or wherever. And I just love the energy that emanates out of India. And you're a perfect example of that, mate. You've got an energy and a passion that is palpable, and obviously is solving problems, and that is absolutely awesome. So thank you for sharing your ideas, your journey, and look forward to catching up in real life one day.
Absolutely, Jeff, and thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.